Welcome back to our closing plenary for today. I hope that many of you will be able to join us again tomorrow. But what you'll be hearing from in just a moment is Adrian Rafizadeh and Dr. Danny Richter. I also just want to say that 8 weeks ago, we made the decision to go from a live conference to a virtual conference. This is the first time we've ever done this. And the amount of work that it went to transition to a virtual conference, I would have to actually mention every single staff member and many volunteers by name to actually name everybody who should be named. But it was a remarkable piece of work, and thank you all for what you did to put this on. I also want to thank many people chose the option of donating to CCL when you registered for the conference, and that raised over $32,000. So for those of you that made sense, thank you so much for doing that. That makes a big difference at this point. So first you're going to hear from Adrian Rafizadeh, a high school Republican who found his way to our organization. I think you'll find his story compelling, and then we look forward to hearing Danny Richter wrap up the conference today.
Hello, my name is Adrian Rafizadeh, and I am a senior at Leland High School in San Jose, California. I hope everyone is doing well and staying safe, and I'm so glad that we are still able to, as climate activists, connect and spread ideas in the way that we're doing. So let's get into it. I have been a conservative climate outreach fellow since August, and my job is to talk to Republicans about climate action, which is just as fun as it sounds. So what I wanted to do today is give you all some insight into the development of a young conservative climate activist like myself. As you might be able to tell from my slightly threatening last name, my parents immigrated from Iran to the US in the early 80s. At that point, because of the 1979 revolution, Iranian Americans made up the largest subset of foreign students in the US. Iran had become completely destitute of any opportunity, governed by just an absolutist theocratic chokehold. My dad had tried to attend college multiple times in Iran, and he had the grades too. But every time he applied, they rejected him because he didn't pass their religious and political vetting. At that point, he knew he had to leave Iran to get an education, and he set his sights on America. And like every good immigrant story, a turning point occurred in a dark back alley. US dollars had recently been banned, but my dad and grandfather were able to obtain 3 $20 bills in a dark back alley in Tehran from a shady-looking guy. With just $60 and a plane ticket, my dad arrived in the States. Except it actually turned out to be $40 because one of the 20s was found to be fake. He worked hard to pass his community college courses, sleeping on whatever couch he could find, before transferring to UC San Diego and getting his degree in electrical engineering. But even in his first week working at his first job, he still didn't have enough money to cover his food until he got his paycheck, so he had to borrow money from his coworkers. My mom's story followed a similar trajectory. She arrived to a wholly foreign country at only 16 and worked her way into a successful career in Silicon Valley, graduating college 2 years early. People in CCL often ask me how I developed my political views, and what I describe is exactly how. My parents showed me that America's freedom of markets, speech, and religion can empower anyone of any walk of life to work hard, succeed, and make a life for themselves. They are the American dream, and keeping that dream alive is what drives my worldview. This is far from the correct convention for me to give a stump speech in favor of the GOP, but the point is that the values that I inherited from my parents of personal responsibility and empowering the individual correspond mostly with the Republican Party, and that's how I entered politics as a high school freshman. So naturally, I thought climate change was a liberal hoax. I mean, that's what everyone was saying, how could you blame me? Fox News, Donald Trump, conservative Twitter, Republican congresspeople, they all concurred. Climate change was a globalist scheme meant to bring socialism to the United States and desecrate the Constitution. Scary stuff. So I always was that guy that interjected pseudoscience into conversations with other students, and I was proud of it too. Students would be talking and I'd say, well, actually, the alarmists were sounding the bell of global cooling in the 70s. And then I'd drop the mic and smugly walk away. As high school went on, my environmental beliefs began to evolve, thankfully. I took AP and honor science courses and learned about anthropogenic climate change, and at that point the facts were just right in front of me. There was no use vehemently disputing them. And I joined the debate team also, and I found quickly, and I mean extremely quickly, how indefensible climate denial was. Those were some short debates. But even though I knew the climate was changing, I just kind of pushed it to the back of my mind. I didn't think it was my issue to think about. Climate change policies seemed like bread and butter progressive doctrine. I didn't want to ban cows or airplanes, nor support a hostile government takeover of the economy, so I just allowed cognitive dissonance to take over. It's not my problem, I thought. Anyway, in my AP research class, I had an opportunity to write a paper on any topic of my choice. So, given the recent media trends, I chose to scathingly bash the Green New Deal. I was so excited to point out how obsolete the legislation was through both an economic and environmental lens. Proving how it was a poor economic choice was quite easy and fun, but I started stumbling when it came to talking about the environment. I could easily bash the jobs and housing guarantee, but I found it difficult to say that we didn't need to reduce our emissions quickly and aggressively. Every single piece of academic literature had reached a consensus that there was no way around ending our use of fossil fuels. I couldn't find what I wanted to hear. At this point, I began to contextualize how many lies were being disseminated by conservative media, the Heartland Institute, the oil lobby, and how easy it was to fall for this misinformation. And I struggled with it for a while, and thinking, how do I reconcile being a fiscal conservative and believing in the real crisis of climate change? This consistently nagged at me, even when I wasn't working on my assignment. And as I continued to look into it, I found some interesting free market solutions. Things like innovation lotteries, technology subsidies, and, wait for it, carbon fee and dividend. The policy just made sense to me. It used capitalism and innovation to gradually transition the market away from fossil fuels. I didn't quite connect it to my personal beliefs, but for me it sufficed to just write about it in my paper. I didn't become a champion climate advocate, but I found solace in being able to point to a solution. Many conservatives, or at least the ones that we want to be interacting with, actually do get to this point. It wasn't until about a month later when I went from believing in a solution to actually advocating for it. I went to attend the Liberty Forum meeting, which happens monthly in the Silicon Valley. And it is a gathering of a lot, like hundreds of conservatives in my area. And by conservative, I mean conservative. This was the kind of place where Trump bumper stickers outnumbered people. So as you can imagine, I was surprised to see a booth of the Citizens Climate Lobby. And they were taking a real beating from the other attendees, so I had to go see what was going on. I got to talking with some of these fellow conservatives who were passionate about carbon pricing, and that's when it all clicked. I knew that climate change could be solved by utilizing the market, but I didn't know how I could help. And then there it was, right there for me on a silver platter, how I could help. I think I was so excited that I signed up on the clipboard twice. And this is my point here, that many young conservatives have lived my same story, but fell short at the clipboard. They had some realization that the older party folk were lying to them, and that climate change was a threat, and that something had to happen. But no one reached out and extended a hand and said, here's what you can do. There is so much potential within college Republicans, young Republican clubs, and Young American for Liberty clubs that goes completely untouched. Mainstream environmentalists just don't dare to venture into conservative spaces, which is a real shame. Frank Luntz, a famous GOP pollster and former unabashed climate denier, recently conducted a series of polls regarding conservative and liberal attitudes towards climate change, and specifically carbon fee and dividend. So Luntz found that an astounding 75% of Republicans under 40 support a carbon fee and dividend. 75%, that's huge. And the question has to be asked, why are these folks being left untouched by environmentalists? The foundation for action is there, but no substance is growing off of it. In fact, that foundation only seems to enlarge, as 58% of this demographic has had their fears about climate change increase in 2019 relative to 2018. Yet the fact that young Republicans support carbon fee and dividend and are worried about the climate threat mean practically nothing. As long as we don't engage them, their beliefs fall right under the radar. The reason why it's vital to empower eco-friendly Republicans under 40 is that they are the key to communicate to members of Congress that climate policy, especially carbon fee and dividend, can be and is bipartisan. And all of us at CCL know why policy absolutely must be bipartisan. First and foremost, in the short term, we have to get a bill passed by a divided Congress and a Republican president. But more importantly, in the long term, policies that are bipartisan are inherently much more resistant to future appeals because, well, they're bipartisan and have more bipartisan support. But we all know that. We know that we need Republican support. So Lund's found something else really interesting, that 69% of Republicans of all ages are concerned that their stance on climate is hurting their outreach to younger voters. So even though these older conservatives may not be Prius-driving vegan climate heroes, they can see that young people are, kind of. What we're seeing is that Republicans are beginning to feel the heat, no pun intended, and we're actually seeing these concerns materializing in DC. House Republicans have started taking action in 2020, albeit slim action, with a series of new bills rolled out by Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy. The bills include provisions for things like growing more trees and granting tax credits for carbon capture. But Kevin didn't give us any emissions targets, though, and one notable thing about the plans is that they only focus on sucking carbon out of the air and not about preventing it from getting there in the first place. Fossil fuels are virtually untouched in these plans, but let's look at the glass half full. Conservatives in DC are starting to wrap their head around the climate. This is the beginning of incremental growth, and it's all due to their youth. Here's an excerpt from the Washington Examiner, who interviewed Kevin McCarthy. It says, McCarthy issued one stark warning to his party. He said younger voters are worried about climate change and cautioned that Republicans were risking their viability in elections over the long term by ignoring this critical issue. McCarthy said, we need to have an open discussion about what the party will look like in 20 years from now, and we should be a little nervous. We have to do something different than what we've done. So there it is, the debate has opened up, and we need to get in there and peacefully throw some elbows. While the Republican plan only really scratches the surface, at least we're at the surface. We even saw that President Trump signed on to the pledge to plant 1 trillion trees by 2050 at the Davos conference. This is President Trump. This is the first major environmental policy to penetrate through his climate denial. Scratching the surface, yes, but before we were in the deep ravines of climate change being a Chinese hoax. Youth speaking up made Republicans in Congress check themselves and start being proactive on climate. Imagine what we could do if we could communicate to Republicans in DC that young conservatives want to see a carbon fee and dividend. And we wouldn't be lying because 75% of them do. We're not exaggerating at all, so let's tell them that. I've been able to give talks to college conservative clubs like Young Americans for Liberty as well as my local Young Republicans group. With all the talks that I've given, not a single person has challenged the science. Very few, rarely even challenge the economics of carbon fee and dividend. What I see every time is young conservatives who have been overlooked by the climate movement, who have been told that climate activism isn't for them, now excited by having a solution to get behind. So how do we build more bridges with young people and with conservatives? They say that 90% of success is just showing up, and I think that is absolutely true. If those brave CCL volunteers didn't show up at the Liberty Forum in March 2019, I wouldn't be standing up here. We have to show up and talk to conservatives. Meet them where they are at. Go to that county Republican Party meeting. Go to that college Republican Club meeting. Go seek out the young Republican group in your area and engage conservatives on climate. So to conclude, there has never been a more opportune time to capture the attention of young conservatives who want to have a livable world for their future. I hope that I was able to give some insight into how young conservatives think and how we can maximize their potential. Thank you.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. My name is Danny Richter, and I want to start my talk by answering a question that I know a lot of you have had in a lot of these presentations. And the answer is yes, I am wearing shorts right now. And that really just highlights what strange times we live in. Normally, I'd be actually wearing a full suit now and shoes, and I'd be in front of you, we'd all be in the same room, and I'd be giving this talk at the end of a 1 hour and 20-minute session. I'd have answered a lot of your questions in that time, but instead we've spread that one session over 3 weeks. So I'm going to start by reviewing what I've covered in that 3 weeks. On May 28th, I gave a webinar on the primary asks and on the supporting asks. I spoke for 25 minutes and I answered 27 questions in 30 minutes. Both the 25-minute presentation and the 30-minute Q&A are still available on CCL Community, and you are welcome to either review those before your meetings on Tuesday and Wednesday or to watch them for the first time. The main theme of that presentation was meeting members of Congress where they're at and adapting to the times we find ourselves in. Members of Congress are still very much tied up in the more than 40 million jobs that have been lost since the lockdowns and quarantines began. and with the American lives that have been lost due to the pandemic. I think that this is still the headspace for a lot of members of Congress. For every primary and supporting ask, the language we supply to you highlights jobs. Given that jobs has been a top 7 topic every single year I've done the June analysis, jobs is always a good theme, but this is especially true when unemployment is at levels not seen since the Great Depression. For my June 11th presentation, I focused on our legislative strategy both for this lobby day and for the coming 6 to 7 months. I also tried to give you an idea of where staffers' heads are at so that you're more likely to be able to connect with them in your meetings next week. That was a 28-minute presentation, and I answered another 27 questions, this time in just 27 minutes. Likewise, both this presentation and this Q&A are also available on CCL Community. To summarize, for this lobby day, our focus is on sensitivity, adaptability, and building clout. We want to be sensitive to where members of Congress are with respect to the 3 crises that are on all of our minds: climate, COVID, and racism. We need to be showing adaptability to the constraints these place on both on us and on the attentions of members of Congress. They have to be responsive to their constituents, and their constituents are always going to be most concerned with the crisis that is right in front of them. And third, we are seeking to build our clout by lobbying on additional and complementary policies to the Energy, Innovation, and Carbon Dividend Act, most of which other organizations are also behind. This enables direct side-by-side comparisons of what you all can accomplish and what their organizations can accomplish. It is our hope that when they see what you are capable of towards a common goal, they will be impressed and will demand that CCL be invited to more discussions. That is clout. For the next 6 to 7 months, bowing to the reality of little attention and little time in Congress, we are focusing on supporting Representative Deutsch in his goals to reintroduce an updated bill in bipartisan fashion early in the next Congress. And we want to focus on ratcheting up support for this bill in lasting ways that make it so that future co-sponsors don't have as far to leap when they hop on the bill. HR 763 is Deutsch's bill. It is not CCL's bill. I know many of us have fallen into the habit of referring to it as our bill, but we really shouldn't. It is Deutsch's bill. As I pointed out last June, we surrendered a lot of control over the content and direction of the bill when it was first introduced. This was a difficult step, but a necessary step, and it's a step I do not regret at all. Because we have taken that step, we've gotten over 1,500 endorsements and statements of support. Some of those statements of support we would not have been able to get without the one now retiring Republican on HR 763 that I know worries so many of you so much. It worries me too. But without that one Republican, we would not have gotten, among others, the statement of support from the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, nor the statement of support in principle of the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. What this accomplishes is it closes the distance that the next Republican will need to jump in order to hop onto this bill. This is a ratchet. It's something that can't be undone. It only goes one way. And I want the next 6 to 7 months to be focused on getting more such ratchets in support of the bill. We have more work to do to close the distance for more co-sponsors, both Democrats and especially Republicans, to jump on this bill. In the November lobby day, a major focus of ours will be consolidating support for the bill, making sure that existing co-sponsors are ready to sign on again in the new Congress. And we are going to come prepared with all the ratchets, statements of support and endorsements we've already gained, and the ones we will gain between now and that lobby day to start the new Congress with a running start. To connect with staffers, I encourage you to remember that they are human, and they have all lived through the same 3 months that the rest of us have. Staff are overworked at the best of times, and this is not the best of times. Plan for success. Plan for an aide who is ready to talk to you in detail about your ask, but show understanding if you happen to get one of the many aides who are currently overwhelmed. That will help with the long-term relationship. So that's what I've been covering over these action-packed 3 weeks. And you know what? It's been hard. it's been 3 weeks where it's been easier to despair of the future than to have hope for the future. Now, of course, for the climate advocate, this dynamic of despair versus hope is very familiar. To truly understand what is at stake with this global experiment we're all conducting is to confront despair. And in all of this mess and upheaval, here CCL stands in the far middle, working hard to build bridges between the parties and the political will to address the source of our despair. At CCL, we have always understood that action is the antidote to despair. Though we come here because of what we fear the future may hold, there is no need for our common action to be morose, despondent, or sad. It is okay, it is permissible, it is even encouraged to have fun while doing this hard work. We are better advocates when we advocate together and when we take time to savor that which we are trying to save. I also want to point out how unusual it is for people to possess the courage to act in the face of despair. It may be easy to forget on a webinar with over 2,000 people on it, but most people in our democracy do not manifest the kind of courage that you are showing just by being here. Not even most of those who are alarmed about climate change manage that level of courage. A point that the director of the Yale Project on Climate Change Communications and frequent guest speaker for CCL, Tony Leiserowitz, likes to make comes from his groundbreaking Six Americas work. The point he makes is that 31% of Americans are alarmed about climate change. In a population of 318 million people, that is 98 million Americans who are alarmed. Yet nowhere remotely close to 98 million people are acting. Dr. Leiserowitz likes to point out how, if even a small fraction of those 98 million people were to become active, that would change the world very, very quickly. If you're on this call, then you have confronted your despair for the future of the world, and you've decided that you will stand up and consecrate your purpose to hope. But here in the far middle, one thing that we believe is necessary to dispel the pall of our changing climate casts on our collective future is cooperation between the parties. A durable solution, one that doesn't get rolled back in future Congresses, requires support from both political parties. It requires that this issue, the climate issue, be an issue on which the parties agree and work together. It requires buy-in not just from politicians, but from the base who elects them. There remains plenty to disagree upon and plenty of choice between the parties. We need more overlap, and we need more overlap on this issue. This is particularly hard right now. This is, in fact, extremely hard right now. It's really not fair that it is this hard right now to build bridges between the parties, but we have to do it anyway. The partisan path is extremely seductive. It's so easy, it's so comfortable to operate in a headspace where you're the good guy, people who disagree with you are the bad guys, and the way for good to win is to eliminate the bad guys. But it just doesn't work. What is required for success is that we see each other as essential partners who can only succeed together. What is required is the kind of optimism that Gandhi showed to General Smuts in the story we still tell in all our climate advocate trainings. To refresh your memory, this story takes place in South Africa when Gandhi fought for the rights of Indians in South Africa. This brought him straight into contact with the head of the Transvaal government, General Jan Smuts. The story goes that when they met, Gandhi quietly told the general, "I've come to tell you that I'm going to fight against your government." Laughing, Smuts says, "Oh really? Do you have anything else to tell me?" "Yes," said Gandhi, "I am going to prevail." Smuts was astonished. "How are you going to do that?" Gandhi smiled and replied, "With your help." Years later, Smuts admitted that this is exactly what happened. Gandhi appealed to what was best and most noble in me. We need to appeal to what is best and most noble in those who do not yet wish to act on climate. We need to see the good in them. And after we've seen that, we need to see how it is intimately entwined with solving this issue. and we need to see the good and how it is entwined with solving this issue even before they see it themselves. We are one people, we are one nation, even after the momentum of the past 30 years of political history has been to drive us apart, to dissolve the overlap between the parties, to make the choice between one and the other ever more stark. Now, I realize that many of you listening may not be able to do this right now, and that's okay. But I do want to remind you of our one rule. If you can't find something to appreciate and respect about the person you're going to meet with, you can't call yourself CCL. This means that if you are in a place where you cannot do that with your elected representative, you should remove yourself from that meeting. If that's where you're at, that's okay. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. Doesn't mean that you can never come back to CCL. All it means is that you are human. And like so many other people in this country, the current moment is having a particularly profound impact on you. That's okay. I would rather you show the wisdom to know where you are at right now than to risk undoing the work you and your team have built over so many years. But I do expect you to come back to this work. We cannot, any of us, let ourselves off the hook on doing the hard work of building bridges across the American political spectrum on climate change solutions. To do so is tantamount to succumbing to the despair climate brings. A rest, the time to recuperate from the collective trauma of these three crises and all the personal crises that are the usual backdrop to the human experience, that's a great idea. I know that I certainly need to rest from time to time. When we're charged up, we come back and we come back stronger. So this is my message to you. I'm not letting you off the hook. Despite the despair, I expect you to continue to do the hard work of finding common ground, of humanizing your fellow Americans who do not at this point in time want to address our shared climate crisis. If you need a break, if you can't follow our one rule, I want you to take the space and the time you need. But I want you to take it with the intention of charging up and coming back. This commitment to humanizing others is countercultural. It is against the trend of the last 30 years of our democracy to create bridges between the parties and to demand shared purpose. That makes it extremely hard, and particularly right now. I expect you to do it anyway. That's it for me. So thank you all for listening, and thank you for joining us at this event, for the hours you sat listening to our presentations. As always, we love to hear your feedback so we can improve our future events. And if you have a little bit more time, we'd appreciate it if you could take a moment to complete the feedback survey that will be emailed to registered attendees, or you can find it at cclusa.org/feedback. Thanks again to everybody, and go get them.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Citizens Climate Lobby's training program. You can tune into more episodes anywhere podcasts are available. Inspired by what you heard today? Join Citizens Climate Lobby to advocate for bipartisan climate solutions. Go to community.citizensclimate.org to find more trainings, resources, your local chapter, national action teams, discussion forums, and more. Be sure to like our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and Instagram @CitizensClimate. We also invite all of our listeners to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more inspiration. And together, we are creating the political will for a livable world.